I wasn't leading worship in college, I was always in the production booth or running lyrics or switching cameras, or I was on set with the production team. And to the point that it came to my leaders, my oversight being like, Jesse, you have to choose. So I started a business, and when people would ask me, oh, do you do video? I would say yes, and I would be lying, and I would go on YouTube and I would figure out how to do it. My journey has been extremely trial and error. In today's landscape, social media and visuals are king. Visuals are so important as consumers. Obviously we listen to podcasts, we listen to the radio, but like we consume things usually visually, scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. And so I felt like there was a need with Red Rocks Worship, and the ground that Red Rocks Worship was taking, both, with the church as well as with the audience of the world, there wasn't a very strong visual presence. Anything that is representing your brand visually, I think it should have a cohesive look, and I think that can easily be achieved by the coloring. Trying to be as true to the room as you can be is best. Taking creative liberties sometimes is fun in terms of your coloring, and I think for the most part representing your room and what's happening with the lighting and the overall look as best you can is the way.
Jesse Robertson, welcome to the Churchfront Worship and Tech Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Jesse, it's great to have you on the show, and I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners. And so why don't you kind of start us off by introducing yourself to our listeners. Who are you? What do you do? What are you up to these days?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm Jesse Robertson, and I'm just honored to be here. I've heard such great things about Churchfront and all that you guys are doing, so I'm just honored to be here. I work with Red Rocks Church, and particularly with Red Rocks Worship as our creative director. I also get to support our team as a worship leader and songwriter, and just overall, anything visual and now anything musical usually will come through me. So it's super fun to get to kind of work in both lanes. We are on the tail end of an album release cycle. We just released our latest project, Ascend, which was just so fun. If you check out the visuals there, my husband and I got to travel to Iceland and capture this beautiful church in Iceland, and it's really cool to see it all come together. And then it's crazy because it's like years of work, and then now we're at the finish line, but it's actually the starting line because now it's out to the world, we just today actually released, we announced that we're going on tour. So we're today, as of the recording of this podcast. I hope if you check out our tour stops, maybe we're hitting one of your cities, and we're super busy over at Red Rocks Worship. So.
Yeah. Lots going on. Okay, so how long have you been working on the project? I know those albums take a while, but I mean, if you're talking about an album and a tour, when did that whole process start for you guys?
Yeah, so in 2022, so last year, at the start of the year, I think the big song write where we got a chunk of the songs happened in May. And this was actually the quickest that we've ever turned around a project. It's usually, we're usually on like a 2-year cycle, from start to finish. And so this project, we started writing in 2021, but really hit the ground running in 2022 in spring. And then we did our live recording December 2nd of 2022. And then, it's 2023, summer of 2023. So that's kind of the duration of this one. So that's a little bit of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when does the tour kick off for you guys?
So our first date, we're actually starting in Florida, in Orlando, at Disney World, which is awesome. September 1st. So
wow. You're performing at Disney?
Yeah, so it's at one of so we're actually at this conference called Experience Conference, which is, right. I think a little kind of similar to Churchfront, but where they're just a resource for churches and worship leaders. And so we're starting there. So unofficially a part of the tour. And then like that morning we're at Experience Conference, and then that night we're at a church in Orlando. So yeah.
You guys will be getting in a lot of reps around that tour. It'll be awesome.
We sure will. We're super stoked because on the tail end of that tour, actually Sean Johnson, our lead pastor, is going to join us.
Cool.
So that'll be something new. And our tagline for this tour is "Come have church with us," because that's really what it is. When Red Rocks Worship goes out, it's the heart is just to take Red Rocks Church on the road, and so it's super cool to have Sean come with us this
Yeah.
time around too.
Killer. Man, well, I want to dive into, I have some questions about your role and kind of, I feel like you could probably add so much value to our audience. So, I mean, first of all, creative director, worship, like your role, what does it oversee? What is kind of in that job responsibility? Can you describe to our audience what exactly it is that you do on the team for Red Rocks?
Yeah. So, as it pertains to anything Red Rocks worship, I particularly work with our label team. I work with our management, and I oversee anything visual that comes through or is outward facing from Red Rocks worship. On the church side of things, I work in tandem with our creative team. So if they have any needs for worship, like if we're in worship and we're doing, a special number, or we have like an LED graphic that's synced with a song, or usually our creative team will handle those things, and then I will come alongside and help resource and provide assets if needed. So anything outward facing is what comes through me. So
That's awesome. So you really kind of see the funnel of all the different avenues, and you have to kind of bring them together, make sure that they're, I mean, it's a quality control role, but also you have a lot of vision that you get to cast in that role, for how Red Rocks is represented. Am I kind of picking that up correctly?
yeah, absolutely. Hmm.
Very cool. So talk to me about, I mean, when we think about the creative director role on a church staff in a worship context, like what, one of our questions is like, how would you encourage, or I mean, justify is not the right word, but like, where do you get the inspiration or the calling for the need for that role? Like, as you talk as a church staff, what's the why behind having somebody in that seat beyond just like a worship pastor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, in today's landscape, in our digital landscape, social media and visuals are king, outside of, the king.
Right.
But visuals are so important as consumers. Obviously, we listen to podcasts, we listen to the radio. I think CDs are a little bit a thing of the past, but like we consume things usually visually, scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. And so I think a couple years back, I sat down with Tyler, who is our Red Rocks worship director. He oversees all of Red Rocks worship. And I felt like there was a need with Red Rocks worship, and the ground that Red Rocks worship was taking, both, with the church as well as with the audience of the world. There wasn't a very strong visual presence. And so I think, there was a need that was presented, and then it's a new role for the church, because Red Rocks Church has a creative director that oversees all ministries. They oversee me, they oversee what worship does, but ultimately I oversee just our little umbrella of Red Rocks worship. And I think for our church, a benefit of my role was that I could also support via leading worship. So there was a little bit of duality in what I could do at first. My role actually started contractually, and I came in and I handled our social media platforms, managing those. I started working a little bit with the label, and I was able to absorb. Editing music videos, editing album covers, single covers, like some of these kind of nuancy things that the creative team was a little like I was able to absorb those things to support the creative team and the output that we were able to produce as a church. Also, I mentioned this a few seconds ago, but like while it was a new role, I think in the landscape of the church, like worship teams like releasing albums and being signed to labels, that's also new for the church. So I think honestly, to answer your question, we're still figuring it out. Like what is this role? What does this actually look like? And for me, up to this point, it has been I am able to absorb particular projects so that I can support our creative team. And then I'm able to like really hone in on what it is Red Rocks Worship is trying to say visually, and hopefully visually tell the story that the songs tell, and do that like without having to kind of oversee 10 different ministries. I can just focus on Red Rocks Worship, and that has felt really aligned with the direction of our church. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so cool to hear your insight behind what you get to do, and then also just the transparency of it's new. For a lot of
Yeah,
churches, like these platforms, these ever changing avenues that we try to communicate and reach people in is just a new endeavor. And so, just like any adapting technology, we try to just learn it to the best of our abilities. But what I like about kind of having that role and you having that opportunity is that you really get to I think unify and do it with excellence. Like you can obviously anybody who's listening has ever watched or looked at Red Rocks, on YouTube for a music video or an album cover or listen to one of their productions. It's done with excellence. Like the bar is so good and so high. So you really are able to be drawn in to focus on the lyrical content, on the experience that song or that message brings into you. So, but you wouldn't be able to do that if you were divided over, discipleship ministry and small groups and, legacy ministry, whatever, the different avenues would be. But the fact that you get to really hone in on one message through Red Rocks Worship, I'm assuming allows you a lot of focus around that and like
absolutely.
strategy when it comes down to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool. So I want to hear about, a little bit about like if you don't mind sharing, like what was the why behind this current project that just released, this new album? Like what was maybe the story behind some of that brought it about?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've said it since the beginning of this project. Like we are at the core of the worship team at Red Rocks Church. And so when we would be in any of the rites, we would start it by, first of all, praying and asking the Lord to give us revelation of who He is, and allow us to draw closer to Him. But the conversation was like, well, what does our church need right now? What are we trying to teach our church? What are we saying? And so this album is about our church and the church. And these songs are, I hope, vehicles for our congregation and various congregations across the world to draw closer to the Lord and to learn more about Him. I think I'm so excited about the content of this album, both visually, because I think it does an amazing representation of the church, obviously the picture of a church, but the lyrical content, it there's one song that I got to be a part of writing. It's called What a Gift. And it's a song that teaches about the Holy Spirit and His journey, and what it meant when, or just what the Holy Spirit's journey was. And there's not many worship songs that teach about the Holy Spirit. We sing about Holy Spirit, we invite Him in, but there's not many songs that teach about the Holy Spirit. And so I can say that about all of the songs on the record. They are meant for our church and for the church. And then as far as the visuals, for this project, I remember I feel like as a creative, especially in this new territory of worship teams releasing music and releasing albums, it kind of felt like back in 2022, there was this pressure of like, I need to create the latest and the greatest and the
Mm,
newest and the best. And I think as creatives, of course, I think we all kind of have that pressure, and certainly in the church space, like again, everything is streaming, so you can tune in and watch all of the mega churches, all of the big churches, and look at the lighting and the production, and feel the pressure that, oh, I need to, like, that's somehow the level, that's somehow the bar I have to reach, and it can just be overwhelming. And I felt like the Lord was calling us, visually speaking, back to simplicity, back to the basics, because I was thinking like, man, you know, what graphic design, who's going to design the album cover, and what is it going to say, what is it going to look like, how am I going to create graphics that are cooler than, X, Y, and Z, and just, that pressure. And I felt like the Lord, I actually had a dream, and in the dream there was a church in a desolate field, and it was both personal and I feel like a call to our team, to make it just about the church. And so in that moment, I knew that the cover was just going to be a photograph. There wasn't going to be any graphic design, any copy, even just a photograph of the church. And being a creative, I wanted it to feel aesthetic and cool. And so I went on Google and I searched desolate churches in a field. And of course, the conversation I had to have with Tyler to say, "Hey, I think I have to go to Iceland to shoot our album cover," was a big conversation. He said, "Iceland, okay." And so we prayed, and it felt aligned. But yeah, at its core, I mean, this album is for the church, and I think our hope is that when you see the album cover and you see the steeple pointed heavenward, that we would be reminded as God's people, to distinguish ourselves by who and how we worship. And I think the songs do just that. They point us towards the Lord. They set our eyes on the Lord, and may our gaze never leave Him. Anyways, I'm
Really cool.
yeah.
It's just really cool to hear the story behind that, and the simplicity. I mean, I think I've at least noticed in some of our conversations, there is a little bit of a shift happening away from some of the more, I won't call them entertainment, approaches, but just more of the complex setups. Like, I think a lot of people out there are really trying to get back to the basics and back to the simple setup where they can just focus on the Lord, on what it looks like to be a part of the church. And so I think that will resonate with people. I've listened to the album multiple times already. So I love the content. When you talk about the visuals, when you talk about what's included in this project, are you referencing the music videos and the band doing that?
Yeah, the music videos, the visuals, like if you look at our lyric videos, while we went to Iceland to capture the church, we also went around the country and captured different landscapes, waterfalls, the glacier runs, and, just all the different terrains in Iceland. And it just felt like a great way to let God's beauty, God's nature speak for itself,
Yeah.
without convoluting it with a bunch of copy and, what I could come up with. Like his nature, just I feel like it brings the project to its fruition. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, man, I haven't seen the lyric videos. I've seen the videos of you guys in the church singing the songs, and they're, it feels like you're there. You want to engage, you want to participate, but I'm excited to go check those out. Because Iceland, man, what a gorgeous place. And I've only ever seen video, but I can only imagine, like, you're just there and it's a whole different, especially coming from the States, whole
Yeah.
different approach and unraveling of God's beauty and creativity, right? When
Yeah.
you're there, what was like maybe beyond the photograph of the album cover, what was your favorite piece that you saw while you were over there?
Well, oh my goodness. Anytime we sent the drone up into the air, it was like you never knew what you were going to see. And it was like it was crazy how many glaciers there were. Glacier, all the glacier silt, and it's like blue and silver and like all these tones that you can only like dream of as a creative, that you're just like, you can't fake this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think everywhere we went, when we would send the drone up to get the footage, it literally was like, what are we going to get? Are we going to get like volcanic mountainous rocks? Are we going to get the glacier runs? Are we going to get like beautiful waterfalls? Are we going to get, there was a lot of sheep randomly, a lot of
Hmm.
sheep. So sometimes they'd be up on the mountainsides, on the hillsides. And then there was one like, some of it looks very like Lord of the Rings, and like the rock formations were all just very unique, every place that we stopped. So I can't even pick a favorite. And
That's
I
so
do have
cool.
to say, I have to shout out our production team at Red Rocks Church, because they're going to laugh if they hear this. Chase, shout out to you.
Chase
He's our,
Davis, the
yeah.
man, the myth, the legend.
So there was nothing simple I will say this about our lighting setup. However, we did away with our LED screen. It was important to us that our stage felt different, new, fresh than what you see on a week to week basis. And so I let him have it, let him just run with it, and yeah, our lighting setup was beautiful. So again, nothing simple about that. That took about a full 7 days of setup,
Wow.
and then a few days to we recorded on a Friday, and we had to have it turned back over on Sunday morning for church. So it was a lot of work from our production team for our music videos, and yeah, that so nothing simple about that for them.
But how cool now. I mean, we're content creators, and so we see kind of the evergreen effect. You kind of hustle and pour time and energy into making something, recording something, creating the content, and then it's done, and but it has this everlasting shelf life. I mean, at some extent, like its reach online goes crazy places that you would never expect it to go. And so it makes those, long days, crazy initiatives like so worth it, because you're like, man, I all I did was show up and sing, or all I did and show up and do lights or something. And yet there's people around the world, there's people in, remote areas. There's so many people that will get to see and witness and experience what you guys have created. So it's really cool to kind of think about the potential there.
It really is. It's awesome. Yeah.
So I'd be curious if you could weigh in a little bit for our listeners. A lot of our listeners are, I think, in that kind of small to mid-sized church range, and I bet a lot of them are thinking, man, if I had a creative director, like, I don't even know what they would do, because we don't have any budget or any kind of lighting design or any kind of aesthetic. We don't have a brand identity. So I don't know if you would give some encouragement or maybe some tips for people who are thinking through how to kind of unify a look or an aesthetic, maybe stage design wise, but also just overall, as you think about Red Rocks worship and kind of the brand identity there. Any kind of tips you would give for those who are kind of looking to take small steps in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I first stepped into the ecosystem of Red Rocks worship, there really was no definition to like what the brand was, and so it felt really important to unify everything that was going out. Album covers, also, what is production doing? What is our lighting design doing? And how do I unify that with the photography that's going up on our Instagram feed or on Facebook or wherever it's going? How do I represent what's happening honestly on a Sunday, and then translate that to social media? And so I think a really important thing would be to create some presets and LUTs for both your video content as well as your photography. I think anything that is representing your brand visually, I think it should have a cohesive look, and I think that can easily be achieved by the coloring. I would say, personally, just from my own perspective, I think trying to be as true to the room as you can be is best. I think taking creative liberties sometimes is fun in terms of your coloring and maybe black and white, or doing like affecting the video or photo. I think that's nice sometimes, but I think for the most part, representing your room and what's happening with the lighting and the overall look as best you can is the way. So yeah, I think presets, LUTs are important, and deriving those LUTs from the presets or vice versa. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think color is really important.
Before we continue on with the video, I want to tell you about our sponsor, the Churchfront Live Conference. It's a 2-day conference with keynotes and breakout sessions on topics like worship tech, worship theology, musicianship, and leadership. It is a great way to network with other like-minded ministry leaders in the Churchfront community. The sooner you purchase your Churchfront Live tickets, the greater the discount you will get with the early bird discount code. So head on over to churchfrontlive.com, use that early bird discount code at checkout, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference. Now let's get back to the video.
And how would you, like, if somebody's like, okay, I've heard of presets, maybe they use like Visco or they use Lightroom or something on their phone, and they're like, I kind of know what presets are. Where do I start? Like, if you're talking about looking at their room, what would be some things that you would say pay attention to or grab some look from these areas? Any kind of guidance on where they could start there?
Well, okay, I think if you have, let's say you have three photographers that are volunteering on your teams, or, videographers. I think first of all, it's going to be understanding what are the native settings for the cameras you're using. If you're not providing the same cameras, if everyone's shooting Nikon, Canon, Sony, you know what I'm saying? Because those
Yep.
those all have different color sciences. I think making sure that you have a general preset or a general LUT that can adapt each of those color sciences to be somewhat similar. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so where I would start would be, I think there are so many great resources online, different photographers who have presets, or, there's a company called, I think Motion Array. Have you heard of Motion Array?
Yeah.
I think they have LUTs, and presets. There's so many resources. If there's like a look that you like, I would research what that look is, because it's usually going to be a LUT or a preset, and determine where that look is coming from. And I would purchase the template of. I would purchase the preset. I would grab it. They're usually not that expensive, and then I would derive your own look from those presets or LUTs. And that's super simple in your Lightroom platform, or Premiere, or DaVinci, whatever you're working out of. You can make adjustments and edits to your LUTs or presets, and then export those LUTs and presets, and then provide those to your team, to your volunteers, so that as they're editing, they're also not facing the ambiguity of like, well, how do I edit this? And then you're receiving a bunch of photos that don't look the same. I would also say it's really important to kind of have a photo guide or a video guide, meaning almost like side by sides. Like, here are shots we love, here are shots we don't love. And I think, if you're creative in any capacity, I think we all know kind of what looks good and what doesn't. As far as like, if you're wanting a shot with someone with their hand up worshiping, you can shoot through things to like have some foreground and make it feel a little more creative, or just whatever your taste is, which is amazing. I think it's important to provide a guide to your volunteers, so that they're not kind of shooting in the dark. Or if you have a volunteer who is really strong, and you find that like every time you get content from that particular creative, you love their content, and then there's another photographer who is maybe a little more green, having that photographer create a guide, or empowering them to teach. I think we all love to talk about how we do what we do. And so I think you'd be very surprised at how empowering it could feel to a volunteer, who is, maybe a little further along than another volunteer, and have them teach you. Even I think our volunteers, we don't know it all, so maybe our volunteers can teach us things.
Yeah.
So yeah, does that answer your question?
Super helpful. And I just think, I know there's a lot of people just kind of starting that journey. When we want to do social media, or we want to have better, images on our website, but we don't have the potential to like hire out a photographer that can edit all this stuff for us. But I love that you pointed the kind of the journey to presets, because it can just give you such a good starting place to then
Yeah.
make subtle tweaks. And, it's not, like you said, it's not rocket science. You just tweak it till you find something that feels authentic and genuine to what you guys are trying to communicate. And then you can resave that as your own, and then you have that to fall back on. So it's just, I think
Yeah.
that kind of process will help a lot of folks kind of demystify a little bit of that ambiguity. I'd be curious to know your church, at least the images I've seen, one of the kind of maybe trademarks, and I might be wrong in this, but is it a little darker? Like, the room is a little darker. And I know that in photography, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
A lot of churches have that kind of darker room during worship, or at least the lights dim. So I wonder if you could even give some tips, photography wise, without getting too deep in the weeds, but how do you guys approach kind of the lighting scheme in your room as you take photos without making it just super noisy, super grainy? How do you guys overcome that obstacle, if you will?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well, I mentioned this earlier, but I think first of all, it's understanding understanding your camera and its like native true settings. There in every camera you're on, there's going to be like ideal settings for that lens and camera body. And so usually for the most part, I shoot on a Canon R5, and if I'm not shooting and I'm singing, my intern or someone is shooting on my R5, and that camera in particular in our room, I find ISO around 100 to 200. Usually I'm toggling back and forth between photo and video. And with the R5, it's awesome because there's a setting where you can toggle over to photo and your settings are saved with photo. And then you can go back to video and your settings are saved with video. So if I'm shooting video, ISO 100, 200, maybe 300 if it's really dark. But yeah, not usually over 200, and obviously shutter speed at 50th of a second, because I'm usually shooting in 24 frames or 23.98, and then my aperture usually sits at as close as it can be. So I'm usually at like 1.8 or 1.2, depending on the lens I'm using. So those are the ideal settings for our room. And then I opt for, I would rather undercompensate for the light than expose too much in camera and then get to my final product and it be grainy, or I've blown out my highlights and so I have nowhere to move or go in my post-production process. Then shoot overexposed because it looks good to me in camera, and then get to post-production and then I have nowhere to go. So I think it's important, contingent on what you're shooting. Obviously, if you're shooting raw or if you're shooting in like a cinema camera, or if you're shooting in a like a picture profile, I'm kind of getting technical here, but if
That's
you're shooting in a picture profile, obviously you need to expose for that picture profile, which is usually like 2 stops above exposure. Yeah. But I usually like to underexpose and then I'll compensate in post. And literally exactly what I just said. I have a LUT that I use for all of our photos and then all of our videos. And that's what is on everything. Everything, sometimes even iPhone content. Usually iPhone content for us is like its own thing. I like for it to feel like iPhone content.
Yeah.
And then our premium content, whether it's DSLR or our, what we're absorbing from production, like in our line cut, I like for that to feel a little separate so that there's like a delineation between the 2 pieces of content. But yeah, so I think, again, to recap, I think understanding the camera you're shooting on, and then understanding your room, and you can never go wrong by underexposing. And that can be scary when you're looking in your camera and you're like, I can't really see what I'm shooting. I think light your image enough so that you can like compose well, and then really, if you haven't blown out your highlights, you can compensate in post. Maybe that's not great advice, but that has been kind of my MO.
Well, and I think that's helpful for people in a dark room, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it helps navigate that question. Whereas, it teaches the concept that what you see in camera doesn't always translate to a lot of headroom in post, right? So it's better to not see all of it in camera and be able to actually form the image to what you want later on. I think that's really helpful.
I would focus on composition, like creating a beautiful image that's composed well. And then, and when you get to post, you can really make it your own.
Yeah. I know there are probably a lot of people listening that will be like, okay, how did she learn so much? How did she get so smart? Like, how does she understand the gear and the composition and the foreground, the background, the ND stops and all? I mean, whatever it is, did you just kind of learn all this on the fly, or did you kind of get trained somewhere in your story?
Yeah, so I have always been interested and intrigued in just production, video editing, photography. Since I was a kid, I've always kind of had a knack for it. Took, film classes in high school. I went to college at Highlands College at Church of the Highlands, and that's where I studied theology and then music theory. And that's really where I feel like I was formed as a worship leader. But if I wasn't leading worship, in college, I was always in the production booth. I was running lyrics or switching cameras, or I was on set with the production team, and to the point that it came to my leaders, my oversight, being like, Jesse, you have to choose. Do you want to be in worship, or do you want to be, in production? And I think that was the friction and the tension I sat in for many years, because I love both. I love being on stage and leading worship. I feel gifted in that way, but I also love, thinking about like, what are the camera shots doing? And even on Sundays to this day, I will find myself watching the side screens to see what the camera team's up to, what production's up to, what the lighting team's up to. And so, yeah, I have always been interested in it. And then actually out of college, I moved to Los Angeles. It was kind of a rebellious time in my life, but I moved to pursue a singing career, which crashed and burned really quickly because I realized I love singing in the context of the church. So didn't want a pop career. And so I moved to Los Angeles, and when my pop solo career failed very quickly, I picked up a camera and I started shooting headshots, and I started, kind of making myself available in that way. And it became extremely lucrative in that time of my life. And so I started a business. And when people would ask me, oh, do you do video? Do you do this? I would say yes. And I would be lying. And I would go on YouTube and I would figure out how to do it. And so my journey has been extremely trial and error, like that. It has been putting myself in the trenches and then having to figure it out in the moment, and failing sometimes, but really crushing it in other times. And so, yeah, I lived in Los Angeles for 5 years, and then I got married in 2019, met my husband in Los Angeles, who's also a phenomenal creative. He's an amazing photographer. And we moved to Denver right before we got married. And yeah, we were like fully in our creative businesses individually at the time. And I've learned so much from him in terms of photography. He is truly, I'm biased because he's my husband, but just one of the most talented photographers and content creators and creatives that I've ever known. And so getting on set with him, asking him questions, watching him edit, asking how and why he does things really was helpful. And then yeah, just many years in the industry. I worked at a few creative agencies, freelance mostly, but a few creative agencies. And honestly, I said yes to things that I knew would be challenging. I put myself in scenarios that maybe I didn't have the expertise or the knowledge on, like how to do it. And I just really spent many years learning how to do it. I think something I want to touch on for my fellow females that are in this industry, I feel like it's rare to find women that are in the production booth. There are women there, and I love that, but it's rare for some reason. And so even more so, that was like my motive to be like, no, I'm just gonna kick butt in this field. I'm gonna, when I'm in the creative meetings or leading teams, or going, what the worst thing is, like going to a camera store sometimes, and there are people there who do know so much about cameras, but they kind of make you feel like you don't know anything. And so it was like my goal to be like, no, I know how to operate a camera, and I can talk settings, I can talk frame rate, I can talk color grading, I can talk the lingo. It was important to me to be able to just know the details. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it just many years of pretending like I knew what I was doing, but actually not knowing. So
Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of worship leaders who can resonate with that. I mean, not just as, I feel like everybody picks up a guitar or starts playing piano and they're asked to be the worship leader of a church, and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I guess so, So I'm sure there'll be some people who resonate with that story. And I think it's an encouragement that, man, one of the ways to grow is just to put yourself in some of those challenging positions that won't be easy, but that's how you get stretched. That's how you force yourself into research, you force yourself into trial and error. Like, we are big believers in building the plane as you fly it, and flying for a little bit, building on additional pieces or functionality, because I think that's kind of how Churchfront started. Was we just started teaching what we were learning, and as
Yeah.
we taught it, it kind of caught wind, and so we would figure out more questions that we could go learn and then go teach. It's just kind of a fully revolving door. So any kind of I always like to give really, really practical takeaways for those kind of things. So any channels, resources, or places of information that you have found really helpful for your journey that you would say, man, if you're like going down the YouTube rabbit hole, skip the guesswork and maybe go check out these areas because they've been really beneficial to your journey. Anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think YouTube, I mean, anything you need to learn or anything you're questioning, or if you type it in the search bar, you're probably going to find some sort of tutorial on how to do it. And I still, even being, I feel like where I'm at in my career as a creative director, I still find myself YouTubing how to do certain things.
Yep.
The technologies and softwares are ever evolving, and I think we have to keep ourselves fresh. And so wherever you are in your journey, you're not alone in like having to research how to do things. So, and now, of course, this whole AI thing, I'm like, we're all going to be out of jobs because now there's AI, and we don't need graphic designers anymore. We don't need videos anymore. We don't, apparently. So,
Yep.
So now we have to all figure out how to be better than AI.
That's right. You don't even need to go to Iceland anymore because you could just make AI generate it for you.
Literally, I
Isn't
could.
that nuts?
It's crazy. We did a series a few weeks ago, actually, and all of the graphics were AI generated.
No
as
way.
as kind of just like a trial to see how it was. It was our second Timothy series. So if you go back a couple of weeks, it was all AI generated.
Okay, so we gotta at least spend 2 minutes unpacking what you guys found from that experience. Because I think there's a lot of churches out there that are just like, yeah, I can use this now, and they can do generative fill, or they can do whatever, make me an image of this. And so, what were some of your takeaways from that experience doing graphics for a sermon series using AI?
Well, I think I'm not going to speak to it too much because our amazing creative team they are the ones that oversaw, those graphics. But I know the licensing was pretty interesting, the licensing process to make sure just that like legally we could use these images and promote and display in our services. I think that's always the licensing is always really important, even with anything that we use, fonts, worship songs. Like, make sure you're licensing yourself well and you're protecting what you're doing. I think it's worth it. It's worth the investment to just make sure you're covering all of your bases. There is nothing online that is free usually, and if you use it, make sure to license and credit the original artist or creator. I think that's just important.
Yeah.
So I know the licensing was quite a journey, but I think like my overall takeaway from seeing it was like, oof, like these graphics they were so detailed and so amazing. And I'm like, man, like we have to keep up. Like, we have to keep up with AI. How are we going to do this? But what an amazing resource and an amazing tool for teams that maybe don't have a full creative staff. Maybe you are just the creative director and you handle all graphics, all visuals, worship too. It all falls under you. And what an amazing resource to have in today's landscape. Like, we could actually have compelling, amazing visuals that were because you typed it in and it was generated for you in a matter of seconds. I think that was the biggest takeaway, is that like, whoa, this just gave us back hours of our time,
Right.
Which is you can't put a price on. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from that.
I love it. Okay, so as we wrap, that is super helpful, and I think I've already taken away a ton of value from our conversation. I know our audience will be foaming at the mouth for more. They're going to be wanting to follow you. They're going to be wanting to keep up with Red Rock. So, are you on socials? Do you have your own channels that Jesse operates under?
I do. Yeah. You can find me at It's Jesse Robertson. I'm always, engaging and interacting with our Red Rocks worship platform as well. And my husband and I, we own a creative studio that operates out of Denver. And that is called Robertson & Co. Our Instagram is Robertson Company. And I think we are just, we are content creators, eager and and just like so hopeful to create stories that are compelling and that ultimately lead people to the Father. That's what it's all about, both for worship leaders and, production directors, lighting directors, creative directors, whatever capacity you operate at in your church. I think if we can just set our gaze on the Lord, we won't get it wrong. He will guide our steps. He will guide us. He will come right alongside us. And when we lean into him, he leans into us. So, I think what a beautiful time to be a creative because of the resources that we have with YouTube, with AI, with, and that was one last thing I was going to say. You had asked me earlier, any tips on getting, just getting information. If there is someone or a church that you see that is doing what you want to be doing, reach out because those teams would love to share. There's not been a single church that has reached out to us or that we have reached out to that has said, no, we're not going to share. I think we are all in this together, Sunday in and Sunday out. We are in this together. And certainly I can speak to Red Rocks Church and Red Rocks Worship. If there's anything that you're eager to learn more about, please reach out to us. We would love to help. And I might be reaching out to you too, because again, we are all in this together. So.
That's so good. Yeah, it'd be a shock if you reached out to a church and said, "Hey, what are you using for this?" and they came back and they were like, "Nah, we don't share those secrets." That'd be pretty shady. So, yeah, good tips all around. I have one more rapid fire question for you as we conclude. And it's what is currently inspiring you in your creativity, whether it be an album or art or something in, nature here in Colorado. Like what are you being drawn to right now towards your creative inspiration journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, so I recently had a baby and I've recently become a mom, and that has been like my greatest work of art yet, mine and my husband's, which is just what an honor to be able to create a life and to see her grow. And it's just been so special. But the lesson that the Lord is teaching me in that is to take him as my daily bread. And so my greatest inspiration right now is his word, like is the bread of life that he gives us. Like I have to consume and absorb his word every day, because if I am not doing that, I am not a great creative. I'm not a great mom. I'm not a great wife. I think we have to take the Lord as our daily bread and lean into him, like ask him what he wants to create, ask him what he wants to do through us, because ultimately when we move ourselves out of the way, it is amazing what he does and what he can do through us. And we're not capable or equipped for the glory anyways. So remove yourself from the equation. Like we are like the conduits for him to work through us and to create through us. And so I feel like my greatest inspiration is just coming from the word of God right now, and actually receiving him as my daily bread. So
I love it. Yep. That's a really, really good answer. I think it'll serve a lot of people. I have 2 kiddos of my own, so I resonate deeply with that, knowing that the Lord is the sustainer of all that we do. And so I appreciate your insight there. Jesse, it has been such a privilege to have you on the show. We hope you'll come back sometime soon, and really good luck and safe travels on your tour. We're so excited for you guys. We'll leave all the links to follow with the tour, to check out the new album, to check out the videos, like all the things in the show notes of this video and on the podcast in the description. So thanks for being with us today, Jesse.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.